Hey everyone, today we have Nate Nasralla, founder of Fluent.io on our show. Now, Fluent is a buyer enablement tool that turns your prospects into champions so they can better sell your solution to their internal team and stakeholders. Now, Nate is a two-time founder, his first company having had a successful acquisition, and he comes from an extensive sales background. So all you founders listening in who are struggling to sell, pay attention because this is going to be a good one. With that said, Nate, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for coming on the show. So Nate, let's dive right in. Let's talk about the founding story of Fluent.
All right. So here was the aha moment, which, all the founders listening in, you can appreciate. You don't always call it the aha moment in that moment. For me, it was trying to solve a problem that the sales team I was leading was struggling with. So that problem in any type of B2B sale, usually the make or break moment happens without a sales rep in the room. It's typically when the buyer who's, they've sat through all the demos, they've read the downloads, they go back then and they pitch their team in their own words. They handle the objections, they answer the questions. And it's the most crazy, frustrating thing because you can't control your message in that moment. So I've always sold with the teams that I lead. And it's kind of been my way, through the first founding journey. It was a great exercise for me to continue selling as long as I could, because it always kept me close to the customers. So I was working on one deal early last summer. It was going to be one of the larger deals that would help us hit quota by the end of the quarter. So June 30th. And long story short, the deal didn't close. And it cost the entire team their performance bonus. So obviously you have individual commissions, but then there's bonus, right?
Right.
So, I'm very upset. I feel horrible because I let everybody down. So, now we're in July. I'm working on another deal and I'm like, I got to do this differently this time. So while I'm meeting, we're working with one of the larger social media companies. We're working on a deal that no doubt has a ton of different people involved, but I didn't even know the number of people that were actually involved. I would have guessed it was 5, turned out to be 10 over the long term. How I discovered this is I just had this thought. I was on a call one day and I opened up a blank Google Doc. And as the buyer who I was working to develop into a champion was talking, I just wrote out everything that she was saying, just typed it up as fast as I could. And she was talking all about, what her team thinks about their challenges, the way that they frame it when they're talking with their leadership. And so toward the end of the call, I shared my screen and I said, hey, I think I captured the message that you want to go back and bring to your team, this narrative. I made some suggestions, ways that I think we could slide in here. What do you think? And her response was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing because I would have had to do this. I don't typically send the case studies and the marketing docs and so on. I know what's going to resonate. So I typically do this. This looks great. Here are 3 emails, add them into the doc. Great. Next day, wake up, I see different notifications of questions, comments, things that her team is adding in there. And I'm like, this is fantastic.
Wow.
I can actually see what they're talking about. And the difference was that I could then follow up with her and say, hey, we didn't talk about security and compliance in these areas. Here's some info. And it totally changed the posture of the entire sales process to me pitching at her to us selling together. So we were on the same side of the table selling together. And that was kind of this moment of like, oh my gosh, we should do this for every deal. And so as we did, we ended up closing $1 million on Google Docs. And that kind of kicked off this, I wonder if there's something here. Let me start reaching out and talking to other teams. And that's how you and I actually first connected. You were the very first people that I just cold emailed and said, hey, I think I'm kind of developing something, could I get your feedback? And anyway, we can go deeper from there, but that was kind of the origin story.
I think I just had an aha moment, listening to that story, because it's so true, right? You try to enable your buyer, you give them buyer guides and case studies and God knows what, right? You're hoping that they're able to deliver the message as clearly as you're delivering it to them. And that's probably never the case. And we probably lose so many deals without even knowing about it. So that's huge. That's amazing. Cool. So let's talk about that process then. Cool. You had this idea, you started reaching out for customer discovery. How did you go about actually doing customer discovery and then getting to a point where today you have a product?
So I started kind of at one problem that I kind of had this thesis on of if every single sales rep could personalize and customize material in this way for every deal, that would be knockout. But the issue is that it takes a long time. Like it's a manual, frustrating process to like handcraft and type up every single piece of follow-up. So that was kind of the first place that I started is follow-up sucks. Customization takes too long, make that easy. And as I started doing more conversations, all cold, obviously being in sales for a long time, I have a large sales network, but I almost didn't trust that feedback. And so I started reaching out cold to people who looked like they were selling to say, hey, here's kind of the problem space that I'm working on. Is this an issue? And that's where I stumbled onto this whole idea of building and selling with a champion. Time and time again, what people were talking about was less of a functional problem of it takes me a lot of time to customize, and more this like emotional fear of I have zero control over my message. I don't know what's going on when buying teams are meeting without me there. How do I begin to shape that narrative so that I can actually influence the outcome, which is my job, closing deals. So those conversations, so I had just over 100 different conversations, mostly with B2B teams who are working on some type of mid-market enterprise deal, which mostly just means you have a lot of people who all have to weigh in and sign off on a purchase. So happy to go more into the methods if that's interesting, of like how I actually spun up some of that cold outreach, the frameworks that I used for it. But that was kind of my next step, is to try to say, how do I correctly frame and think about this problem? It started as email follow-up. Customization turned into this idea of champion creation and enablement.
Gotcha. And so I think one thing that you mentioned there was very important is that, it's good to reach out to your network to run some things by them, but that's going to be very biased feedback because people are nice. And so they're going to tell you that it sounds great, it looks good, whatever. But I think getting some unbiased feedback is what you're saying is key. It's a very important element of customer discovery, right?
Very much so. I mean, here's how I would start. The first minute of every conversation is, spare me the pain and heartache of building something that nobody wants. Be as ruthlessly candid with me as you can. And then people kind of get it of like, oh, got it. Okay. I don't need to make this person feel nice. I'll just tell them what I think.
Right. Fair enough. Cool. Let's rewind a little bit. This is your second company. Am I right? Yeah. Second company. So you had a company before, which you grew quite successfully, and then you exited, you got acquired. Let's talk about that journey. And what did you learn in that journey that you're hoping to implement, in your second company now?
So the biggest lesson that I learned is the minute you stray away from direct contact with your customers, you've lost direction. And the reality is, like, every step, every phase in growing the company, from your first customer to the 10th, to the 100th, to the 1000th, there's going to be a new set of nuance that you need to build for, think about. And I always tried to keep as much time on my calendar as kind of open white space so that I could jump on a call with somebody on our CS team, so that I could take a first demo. There was never a point where I said, we're too big, or we've rounded this corner. I don't need to talk to customers directly anymore. And that like degree of intimacy and regularity that I was spending with our customers, for me, has been super helpful as I've gotten back to ground zero, because that's exactly what I'm doing every day. To go from 0 to 1 is it's all direct contact with customers. So that would be, my headline, my takeaway from that experience for founders is, you're never too big to not talk with customers.
Got it. So how do you go about getting your first few customers with a new product?
So the biggest thing that I focus on first is what I'll call like language market fit. When you hit this point where you can describe their problem almost better than anybody, almost better than themselves, they're like, oh my gosh, you must have a solution for me, because clearly you get the problem more than me. And if you get to that point, most people know when you first launch a product, it's going to be early, it's going to be ugly, but there's this almost uncanny belief in, you will have the solution for me over time. I can't wait to grow with it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I'm a big fan of engagement in launching the product, getting people on it before putting a paywall up there. I'll always take, so for example, as we're launching Fluent, we're having sales teams get in there before saying, hey, let's go talk to your head of sales. Let's get the budget for this and so on. Totally agree that revenue is among the best proof points. But at the very earliest stage, you want somebody to get to a place where they can't live without the product. And that only comes by studying how they're using it. Gives your team so much to work with. So when your product is at a point when it is painful to live without it, payment revenue is no problem. That's where the first customers happen.
Gotcha. So what you're kind of describing there is really like get people just using it like at no cost, get them in there, but drive adoption. I think what's important is not necessarily the number of people that sign up for your free trial or that actually get on board, but I guess like product adoption is important. So how do you drive that to ultimately eventually get them to open their wallets? Yeah.
So one of the things that we do early on before even letting somebody onto the product, because it's not like a, free for all, come one, come all, an open call. But what we try to do is define the point at which they're going to begin getting value. So for example, in Fluent, that point in our product is when a buyer joins the workspace that the seller created and makes an edit in the message. And so we know, okay, if we can get you to that point, you're going to say, how do I do more of this? That's incredible. I want every buyer helping me to develop the message so that, they're engaged, higher chance to close and so on. So usually there's this tipping point in the product. And the question is like, for your product, where is that? Like, what's the moment where it clicks and people actually experience the value? You're no longer selling it, which is a proof of something in the future. It's already in the past because they unlocked it for themselves.
Got it. That's a really good point. And you're saying a lot of stuff that gets me really excited. There's like the language market fit, which is so interesting because I remember about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, we were experiencing a lot of client churn. And so what we did was we took our clients that we had and we did jobs to be done interviews with them. And we're just saying like, hey, like what job are you trying to accomplish by hiring us? And we found that they were all speaking the same language. They're all trying to get leads from us, sales from us. But the real reason is they're trying to validate their product in the market. They're trying to find product market fit. This is part of their go-to-market strategy. And so we implemented all of these languages like go-to-market, product, customer discovery, so on and so forth into our materials. And we saw like now we started speaking to clients and their eyes lit up. So that definitely cannot go understated. Like language market fit is so important. And then, yeah, sorry, go ahead. You're going to say something.
I was just going to say, I'm a huge jobs to be done fan. Last week I wrote a Medium article and put out the framework that we used for jobs to be done. And it's awesome because then like my developers, my marketer, they use the same language that our customers use now. And it was all because jobs to be done is a good way to align everybody around it.
That's amazing. So that's the framework that you used for your customer discovery.
It is. Amazing. Every interview, that was the way that I synthesized and looked for patterns and commonality. So huge fan.
That's amazing. Yeah. To everyone listening in, founders listening in, jobs to be done theory, just take a look at it. You can Google it and you'll find like a whole list of questions on how to interview your potential customers. So that was one big thing. And then the second thing I think you said was around that key behavior that a customer does, which shows stickiness with the product, that they finally found value. There's a talk that the CRO, or I think the ex-CRO of HubSpot, he did on this, and he called it like, what is your customer success metric, right? And it's for HubSpot, I think if like users use 5 out of their 20 features, the faster they get to that, that's their product market fit. Like that's when they're good. For Slack, it was like once a company sends like 2,000 messages, they're good. And so that's kind of what you're talking about there, right?
Exactly. Or Dropbox, it was one file in one folder with one share. So over time, and obviously this isn't something that you can, create a theory around and then know it for certain, like user behavior will show this to you. We got so serious about this in the group that acquired my first startup that we started to anchor a piece of the sales commission to that point after customer onboarding, because we knew, so this was, think of it as kind of like the HubSpot for nonprofits, fundraising, marketing, email communication, so on. So we knew that if you uploaded 100 donor records and sent one email to them inside of the first 60 days, the retention rate was crazy, the difference in the gap between those who did and didn't. And so the sales rep, all the way toward the end of the sales process, they would start talking about this. Hey, here's how you're going to get ramped up. Here's what to expect. Here's how we're going to get you to this point, so that they could help enable that customer. And again, like, a company is serious about something when they anchor compensation around it, because that's how you really change like employee behavior. And it was all designed around that customer behavior.
That's huge. That's huge. I love it. Oh man, Nate, you're saying some good stuff, man. That's amazing. Cool. Let's switch gears now. You mentioned like it's a buyer. It's not a sales enablement tool. It's a buyer enablement tool. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So it all revolves around this idea that sales reps don't close deals, buyers do. And the first time people hear that, they're like, no, I don't believe it. But if you look at where all of the make or break moments are happening in the sales process, it's typically when the sales rep isn't in the room. Again, I'll go back and it's the buyer who's pitching in their own words and handling objections. If you can look at the quote product-led growth movement, you can remove a sales rep from the equation and get a deal done. If you remove the buyer from the equation, you have no deal.
Right.
And so the question is then, how do you begin to sell with and enable your buyers as opposed to always selling to them? And it maybe sounds like a subtle thing, but it begins to shift the way you think about your process, your tech stack. So for example, in the world of sales enablement, you're directing all of your coaching and your content on sales reps. It's how do we help you deliver the perfect pitch in a sales meeting and give you all of the content that you need to wow a customer with the best case study. But in the buyer enablement world, it's, well, how do we help our champion clearly message the value, create an internal narrative that gets the CMO or whoever you need in the deal engaged? And how do you give the content to them that they need to guide their process? And this is where it gets really fun. It's not we don't need sales reps, not at all. In fact, it's